if I were to ask you right now to rate the satisfaction of your friendships that you have in life from a 1 to a 10, 1 being like non-existent to 10 being like, I couldn't ask for anything more from my friends, answer in your head. You don't have to tell me out loud, especially if your friends are sitting nearby. But what would you, how would you answer that? How would you rate that overall? You know, the relationship expert and blogger Shasta Nelson asked thousands of people these questions over just many different of her speaking engagements and online polls and things, and these similar questions. And she's found that 50 to 70% of people scored their relationship satisfaction at a 5 or below. She also found that most people were 2 to 4 times more likely to score their friendship satisfaction at a 1 and a 2 instead of a 9 or a 10. Now, she found that nearly every single person scored their desire for closeness or their desire for good friendship much higher than the satisfaction of their current relationships. You know, one of the things that I've come to find as I'm more and more into my adulthood, that a lot of the core things of our lives, you know, things like how to handle finances or conflict management, emotional health, those type of things we never took classes for. There wasn't anybody like any required time. Any of you guys found that to be true in your life too? You're just like, I'm just out here winging it every day. And but making friends and how to have good friendships and relationships, satisfying relationships, is another one of those things that we never had a class on, and we're just out learning based on what we've seen in other people. And so today we're going to have a little bit of a crash course on friendship building, along with the emotions that exist that either help or hinder relationships as we discuss the places that we go with others. If you're joining us for the first time, we've been in a series called the Atlas of the Heart, and we're looking at all the different emotions that are part of the God-given human experience. He created us with all of those emotions that are inside of us, and we've kind of, another one of those things that we've just gone through life without ever really learning about, just experiencing and hoping that we're getting it right. And so this series is to help us understand how God has created us, those emotions he's given inside of us, not just so we can recognize what we're feeling, but so we have a basic understanding of what we are supposed to do when we feel that way. We've been referencing it like a map or an atlas. You know, if you're lost, you can't figure out where to go until you first find out where you are on the map. And so as we are looking at these emotions, we are trying to help us to be able to pinpoint where we are when we're feeling certain emotions, so then we can figure out where to go. Now, Shasta Nelson, along with other researchers, have discovered that there are 3 necessary things we need to have satisfying friendships. And she refers to it as the triangle of frientimacy. That sounds great, right? Now, it should be up there for you. You can kind of follow along. So one of the things right there at the bottom of the triangle there is positivity. Now, we need friendships that build us up, that encourage and affirm us. Now, this doesn't say that we cannot cry, on each other's shoulders or go through hard things together. Those are very important, and that actually fits more in the vulnerability side. But the majority of our relationship needs to be felt as positive. Researchers have found that for every 1 negative interaction that you have with someone, you need 5 or more positive ones for it to feel like a satisfying relationship. Now, this is very scriptural as we look throughout Scripture, and we'll see here in a little bit that we are called to encourage and to build one another up, and God has asked us multiple different ways, commanded us to bear with one another and to fight for unity and all these things. And basically what that means is what these researchers have found, that when you are with other people, it should be a positive experience that builds you up. And so we need more of that in our friendships. Right? And this works as the foundation to our relationships with people. We're first attracted to someone as a friend based on how our interactions with them made us feel. Right? If you interacted with someone the first time and you walked away feeling built up or encouraged or strengthened after being with them, you are more likely to seek out a relationship with them. And vice versa, right? If you felt that your interaction with them was a negative interaction, you're like, I don't think I want to go hang out with those people again. Right? And so if it's positive, you're more inclined to see how that relationship goes. Now, positivity is very important in the relationship, but it can't be the only thing. We also have to turn our attention to this other crucial element of consistency. Consistency involves the time we invest in our relationships, which builds trust and it deepens our connection, right? When you were a kid, most of your closest friends were from school, most likely because it was consistent. Even if you didn't really like them, you kept having to sit next to them, and you're like, that's probably why we're not friends today. Right? But a lot of it has to do with that consistent nature of being in each other's presence over and over. Being a regular in each other's lives is important. You cannot build friendship without having a regular connection. Workplace friendships are common because that consistency is built in, right? And same with church relationships. This should be a place where you're building friends because you're consistently coming here. And not just coming and sitting in here while I'm speaking. You're not going to build a connection with anyone besides me and hopefully God through this time. But coming early and getting coffee and donuts or inviting people to lunch after church, that's where the friendships and relationships come from. It's why we offer it as a church, because these relationships are important. Consistency allows us to also learn the expected behavior of other people. It builds trust. Trust that we will know how they will react because we've seen how they react over time. And also just kind of we start to have the expectations of how the other person treats us. You need to make time for relationships, right? You can't be consistent without making the time. And after the foundation of positivity, the effort needed to be together with consistency, the third part of that triangle is vulnerability. This is where we share and we open ourselves to others. And this isn't just sharing the hard stuff or the bad stuff, but also the good things, the wins. Right? Sometimes it takes just as much vulnerability to share the good things or the wins in your life as well as the hardships. Right? If anybody like, I don't know if I could share this because they may think that I'm being prideful, or they may not handle this well because I know they've had a hard week, or different things that we have to be able to feel that we can be open in our relationship. It's about sharing the past and the present and sharing our emotions. We were created for connection, right? First, we were created for our connection to God. Right? He made us to be able to have a relationship with us. When he created the garden, as we'll talk about in a second, he regularly came down and walked with them in the garden, and it was a daily, consistent, positive, vulnerable part of their daily life. We were created to have that connection. But we were also created for a connection to one another that goes beyond surface level, right? And this is from the very beginning. Like I said, in Genesis 2:18, God created all of everything and just Adam, and he looked at Adam and was like, something's not quite right. Everything else, he declared, this is good. But this wasn't quite right. He says it's not good for the man to be alone, right? So he made Eve. He made a helper for him. Right, an equal but different part that complement each other in their life. Right, and as I was talking about in Genesis 3, we find, Adam and Eve have sinned. They messed up. They ate the fruit that the snake convinced them to eat. And it says that they were hiding. But when God came into the garden, they recognized the sound of him walking through the garden. Right, you don't recognize the sound of anybody doing anything unless it's been consistent. Right, how many of you, actually just Victoria this morning, you're probably still half asleep, and I get up and leave and come here a little before she gets up to start getting ready and come, and I walked over to tell her I was leaving, and she was like, I felt you coming, like I knew you were walking over to me. And like that's because a consistent thing that I do before I leave every morning is to go over and tell her goodbye. And when you have that consistency in a relationship, you know those things. And so that was the connection they had with God. And then they had the connection that they were made for each other because it wasn't good for them to be alone. Now, inside of every one of us is that desire to be loved, right? And that's because we first are made to be loved by God. So we have, some people say we have a God-shaped hole inside of us that, only God can fill. And right? Like, I believe that's true, that we have this longing to be loved in a way that we can't be loved by another human being, and that will come from God. But we also were created for one another. Researchers have found that when we say we want to be loved, what we really want is to be known. Right? I believe that we feel real love when someone knows deep things about us and still accepts us. Right? And so when we're not being vulnerable, we won't feel known, and therefore we won't feel loved because we're missing a part of the frientimacy triangle. I want you guys to really grasp that today, because sometimes we're like, man, I wish my friendships were better, my satisfaction of those friendships, but they're not, because you've never got deep with people. And so therefore you're not feeling fully known, and so not feeling fully loved. And God, this is throughout Scripture. In Galatians 4:9, Paul speaks to this. He says, so now that you know God, or should I say, now that God knows you, why do you want to go back again and become slaves once more to the weak and useless spiritual principles of the world? Right? This is a principle that even being loved by God is that he knows everything about you, all of the good and all of the bad, yet has still chosen you. And he still chooses to love you when you mess up. And even on your best day and your worst day, 100% same amount of love towards you. Now, often we believe that maybe we're lonely in life, or that we, and the solution to having better friendships is to create more friendships. But realistically, that doesn't solve our problem in and of itself. The real problem is we don't have the top of the triangle. Can you put the triangle back up? For intimacy. Right, like most of our relationships, especially like the consistent ones at work, and even if they're a good person, that you always feel built up from them and you see them consistently, your relationship may be only two-sided if you've never shared more of your life with them. Or maybe you ran into someone once at church and you had a positive interaction and you shared about things that were going on in your life, but then you've never hung out with them again. You're missing a piece of the relationship. So most of us have relationships that are at these lower levels, but we've never reached the top of the triangle there, and so we don't feel the satisfaction. Right? Positivity starts the foundation of friendship, but it takes the work of consistency and vulnerability, regular positive interactions while we build the trust and affirmation regularly, and working through moments of sharing good and bad and hard, deep things of our life. So as we go through our message today, we're going to find that there's more than this simplified triangle of friendship. But I want you guys to understand that the relationships is something we were created for. Right? Researchers are finding that the number one public health issue in our world today wasn't the COVID pandemic, was loneliness. That most people that are suffering through physical illness issues is because of loneliness, of not having relationships. When they did this, a side note, you're getting extra stuff that I didn't put in today, but I was reading this study like last year that they did one of the longest studies of human satisfaction of life that's ever happened. Followed these people, these graduates from Harvard, like 50 years ago or something. So they've been following them for a very long time. Most of them are now into retirement. And the ones that had good health and had feel more satisfied when they were surveyed all throughout their life are the ones that had good, steady relationships. Finances, good jobs, even just the unaware or surprise health things that happened throughout their lives didn't change the satisfaction of their life. The things that did was whether they had good friendships and good relationships. Right? We were created for that. They say that the effects of loneliness on our physical bodies is equal to, or maybe even worse than smoking 15 cigarettes a day. It's more harmful than obesity and not exercising, right? So when your friend invites you over for dinner, okay, and you're like, no, I'm on a diet. No, you're choosing worse health options, okay? Right? So eat the food and hang out with your friends, right? It's even worse than a lifetime of being an alcoholic, they're finding when they look at people saying, this is how we were created, to need other people in our lives. You cannot do life alone. We need these relationships, but that doesn't mean that they come easy, okay? You guys have probably found throughout your life that relationships take work. And often they involve a whole range of emotions, and I'm sure we've covered some of them, but we are going to focus on a few today. The emotions and vulnerability expert and researcher Brené Brown has found that the most effective approach to building meaningful connection combines the effective use and understanding of the emotions compassion and empathy. Compassion is defined as the daily practice of recognizing and accepting our shared humanity so that we treat ourselves and others with loving kindness, and we take action in the face of suffering. there are many, many different definitions for compassion out there, but the majority of them share the one trait that compassion isn't just a feeling, it moves to action, that it causes something to happen, even if it's treating people with loving kindness. That is an action that must take place for it to be compassion. Right? Now, we do have to be careful that the actions we take there are correct. When we see someone suffering, we often begin to maybe feel what they're feeling, right? That's the kind of the first step of compassion and empathy, is to recognize their emotions or what's happening in their life. Now, then it moves us to action. The problem is, in our world and the world that we live in, the first action that most of us move into is fix-it mode, right? Or cheer-up mode. And that's often not what people want and or need. And most people are wanting connection. Compassion is an emotion that God has given us because he knows we need connection, and he gave us the emotion that causes us to connect with people. It's why these emotions exist, is to draw us to another person, to build connection where we are at. And when we come in and just say, I want to fix it for you, right? You have the right heart. I don't want you to suffer, and that's okay, right? But what people are longing for, that what they're feeling, what they're needing is connection. People want to know what they're going through isn't new. That what they're going through, they are not alone. And that it's also okay to feel how they feel. When we show up to fix the problem, we're telling them the opposite. Right? Whoa, it's weird that you're like that. Okay, let me help you change those things. Right? We got to get you better. I don't like that, And right, our hearts are in the right place, because really we're coming in with, we don't want you to suffer. But what they are feeling is vulnerability, and when you're like, let me get you out of there, it doesn't convey the message that they need. There's a Buddhist nun, Pema Chodron, says this about compassion, and I really like it. It says, compassion is not a relationship between the healer and the wounded. It's a relationship between equals. Only when we know our own darkness well can we be present with the darkness of others. Compassion becomes real when we recognize our shared humanity. Your "you are here" arrow that we talked about on your map of emotions is pointed at compassion. When you feel for someone else, usually from a place of understanding where they are at, and you are moved to do something about it. Right, we talked about Job last week when we talked about anguish. He found out in this very, very small time frame that he lost everything. He lost his livelihood, his job, everything that was going to provide for him was gone. He lost all of his children, and he lost his health in roughly the way it's conveyed, probably in a matter of 15 minutes. And he collapsed. He just fell apart in anguish. He tore his clothes. He just fell and collapsed. But we've talked about this briefly before. We're going to dig a little more in today on how Job's friends responded to him. In Job 2, verse 11, it says, when 3 of Job's friends heard of the tragedy he suffered, they got together and they traveled from their homes to comfort and console him. Their names were Eliphaz the Temanite, Bildad the Shuhite, and Zophar the Naamathite. I'm sure they had to say that every time. What's up, Zophar the Naamathite? But anyways, this is when they saw Job from a distance. They scarcely recognized him. Wailing loudly, they tore their robes and threw dust into the air over their heads to show their grief. Then they sat on the ground with him for 7 days and nights. No one said a word to Job, for they saw that his suffering was too great for words. Job's friends show compassion by sitting in his suffering with him, allowing themselves to feel alongside him and show him that he wasn't alone where he was at. Right? And he's also not wrong for the hurting that he was feeling and all the things that was going on inside of it. Do you get, they saw him from a distance so much in anguish, it says that his friends wailed loudly. Right, man, if you don't have friends that can recognize you're hurting from a distance and begin to cry for you and with you, and that are willing to put aside their day job and the things that are going on to show up there for you, then like, man, like there is a friendship out there for you. And we're going to talk about all the things it takes to get there, but like that's the friendship that God's created us for and that is needed. Sometimes, like we talked about, we're a little too quick to tell people to cheer up or fix what's wrong. Could you imagine Job's friends showing up? But like, all right, I get you don't have a job anymore and all your children are dead and you're covered with sores, but put a smile on that face, turn that frown upside down, Job. It takes less smile or muscles to smile than it does to frown. You're working too hard. That's probably why you're sad, But we do that to people often, right? Because we're talking about it later, but sometimes it's mostly because it makes us uncomfortable that they're hurting. Man, we have to get past that pursuit of happiness lifestyle. Again, that is not what God called us to. He did not call us to be happy. So when you're telling people to cheer it up like that's the right thing that they're supposed to be doing, you're telling them to pursue a life that God didn't even call them to. Help them to embrace the hardship that they're in and help them to walk through what they're going through together. Man, I would venture to say that until you've gone through a hard time with someone, you're probably not even on good friend level yet. When your "you are here" arrow is pointed at compassion, take a pause. Right? Make sure that you're not falling into fix it or cheer it up mode. But begin to maybe understand where they're at and come alongside them. Now, we do have to be careful to not get confused here with the near enemy of compassion. A near enemy is something that feels really similar in us, but it's not the same emotion. A far enemy is like the opposite, right? A far enemy of compassion would be cruelty. Instead of like, wow, I really wish they would stop hurting. Cruelty says like, no, more hurt. Okay, hopefully you're not feeling that often, ever. But we probably do feel the near enemy often. And the near enemy, we've talked about this earlier in this series a bit, but the near enemy of compassion is pity, right? Instead of openness of compassion, pity says, oh, that poor person, I feel really sorry for people like that. Pity separates. Pity says, oh, you're over there, I don't like that for you, but I'm not going to get in there. Pity separates. And so when you feel that like sorriness for someone and you see their suffering and you recognize it, but it's not drawing you into them to do something about it, you're actually feeling pity. Now, obviously, pity is not great. Man, think about like the homeless around us. I'm trying to recognize in my life where I feel that instead of compassion. And there are times where I feel compassion when I see them and I move to do something. But often we feel bad for them, but not with them. Right? We don't take time to understand or to sit with them in their suffering, or even take time to see if they think they are suffering. We look at them from our place of life and our superiority, and we feel sorry for them in their inferior life. Right? There is nothing worse than feeling pitied. So pity draws a separation between people instead of bringing them together. Pity involves these four elements. First, a belief that the suffering person is inferior. It's passive. It's a self-focused reaction that does not include providing help, right? It's just like, ugh, I don't want that for me. Right? And a desire to maintain that distance instead of sharing pain. Could you imagine if Job's friends walked by and they saw him over there and they're like, ooh, he looks real bad. I feel really sorry that all that happened to him. But, I got my own animal to take care of. I still have children, unlike Job. Right? And we just go about our life. Right? We like to believe that that's compassion that we have for people. But really, we're pitying them. Compassion always leads to action. Even if the action is just sitting with them in their suffering. Pity just leads us to feel bad for others with no action to help or to understand. Now, another emotion that is necessary for connection is empathy. Now, empathy is kind of like a tool of compassion. It helps us to move in compassion because it allows us to connect with someone else's feelings. We can respond empathically only if we are willing to be present in someone's pain, right? If we are unwilling to feel their pain, then it's not real empathy. And that's really hard for us because we like to avoid pain at all costs. We strive for lives of comfort. And so when someone else is hurting, we like to pity. Or maybe another one we'll talk about in a little bit is like we like to have sympathy, but we don't like empathy, which makes us or allows for us to feel their hurt. Empathy is an emotion that allows us to understand what someone else is experiencing and to reflect back that understanding. Feeling empathy helps for us, our interpersonal decision making, right? Because we understand that other people are going to feel something based on our reactions. It facilitates ethical decision making and helping us build better moral judgments. It enhances our short-term well-being. It strengthens relationship bonds and allows people to better understand how other people see them. Now, there are two different kinds of empathy, and one is more helpful than the other, and I think that we focus a lot on the less helpful one. So hopefully today you have a better understanding of what we should do when we are feeling empathy. There is what's called affective empathy or experience sharing. And this is when we choose to feel what they are feeling and take on those feelings as our own, right? And usually this is what we talk about with empathy. It's like, wow, I feel that you're feeling really sad. Now I also feel sad, right? It's not that I understand your sadness. It's that I now feel your sadness. And that's experience sharing affective empathy. And it's not as effective for connection as what they call cognitive empathy or perspective taking. Right? This is the ability to recognize and understand another person's emotions despite how you may have felt in a similar situation. Right? It's not taking on their emotions, it's coming to a place saying, oh, I understand how you are feeling. And you can take that and connect to a past time where you felt similar so that you know how to connect with them. Healthy, helpful empathy is more about understanding what someone is feeling, not feeling it for them. If someone is feeling lonely, empathy does not require us to now feel lonely too, only to reach back in our own experiences to a time where we felt lonely so we can understand and connect. Right? Often if we go about the way the effective empathy where we are taking on their emotions, it usually leaves us in an inability to help them. Right? Because now we feel the same way and we can't get out of it. And then we need someone to come alongside us and do the right kind of empathy, and just this chain of reactions. Yeah. But it's a slippery slope to being overwhelmed and not being able to offer support when you start trying to take on all the emotions of people around you. And that is not, it's a piece of empathy, but it's not really what is the effective for connection. Right? If we could reach back into our experience and been like, oh, I've been lonely too. And now I remember what it felt like and what I wanted in those moments. Now I can connect with them on their need, not based on the feeling. Empathy can be really hard for us when someone's feelings about their situation doesn't match our previous experiences. This happens a lot when it comes to things that maybe you'll never experience. Maybe as a white American who's never left the country, you've never had an experience of racism, right? And so when someone is expressing what their experience of racism is, you may struggle to find empathy because you're going to look at it from your own experiences and be like, I've never felt that. I don't really know if that's true or not. And we got to learn to be better at listening to people's stories and understanding what they're conveying to you, and then connect at that level, not trying to go, have I had that experience? And then bringing that into it. Empathy is not relating to an experience. It's connecting to what someone is feeling about an experience. Brene Brown says, we need to dispel the myth that empathy is walking in someone else's shoes. You guys have ever heard that before? Empathy is walking in someone else's shoes. Untrue. People have been lying to you your whole life. How do you feel about that? I just found out this week I've been upset. All right, if you want to be empathetic, be upset with me, okay? Right, we need to dispel the myth that empathy is walking in someone else's shoes. Rather than walking in your shoes, I need to learn how to listen to the story you tell about what it's like to be in your shoes. Right, and believe you even when it doesn't match my experience. Right, because sometimes we put ourselves in someone else's shoes, and now we're just ourselves in somebody else's shoes. Right, and we're feeling things, we're doing things exactly how we would. That's not empathy. Empathy is trying to relate to who they are and understand it from their perspective. Now, this happened to Job from his wonderful friends that came and sat alongside him. Right? We talk about, man, how great were Job's friends that they showed up and they just sat alongside him in his suffering for 7 days, which is about the only thing they did right, okay, as we'll find out in just a second, okay? So after sitting there for 7 days, Job finally spoke up, and he was like, man, I hate that I'm alive. And he begins to just curse the day that he was born. Why was I born if this is the life that's going to happen to me? And he just vents and he just lets it all out. Now, Job's friends starts a reply in chapter 4 and 5. Right? And instead of being like, it's okay to be hurting. You went through a lot of traumatic stuff. He begins to assume that Job's suffering is because Job sinned, because that was his own experience. Right? In chapter 5:27, it says, we have studied life. This is Job's friend. We have studied life and found this all to be true. Listen to my counsel and apply it to yourself. Right? Do you get what he's saying? He's been telling him, Job, this is happening because you sinned, because you've been a bad person. If you weren't a bad person, this would never have happened, right? If you I figured out life, and this has to be true. Listen to my counsel and apply it to yourself. But Job replies in chapter 6, 28 through 30. He says, look at me. Would I lie to your face? Stop assuming my guilt, for I've done no wrong. Why do you think I'm lying? Don't I know the difference between right and wrong? Right? He's trying to say, I didn't do anything to deserve this. It's just what I've been handed in life, and I don't understand. And his friends do not get it. Nick's friend jumps on and is like, no, Job, you shut up and listen to me. You're a liar now, right? That's why I say, you were probably a liar before, right? And just starts trying to say, you have sinned. And they won't give any credit to Job's real story about what really happened. And Job replies to them in Job chapter 12, verse 2, he says, you people really know everything, don't you? Job is super sarcastic. It's great. And God uses that when later, we're not getting into it today, but read the story of Job. God replies really sarcastic back to Job because he's like, I speak your language. But Job says, you people really know everything, don't you? And when you die, wisdom will die with you. You're the only people who know things. Will be dead when you die. Well, I know a few things myself. And you're no better than I am. Who doesn't know these things that you've been saying, right? You're right in what you're saying. It just doesn't apply to me. Verse 4, yet my friends laugh at me, for I call on God and expect an answer. I am a just and blameless man, yet they laugh at me. People who are at ease mock those in trouble. They give push to people who are stumbling. Right? And again, another guy jumps in and is like, no, this is what you should be doing, Job. You're obviously saying, here's how to fix it. Right? A misunderstanding of his actual story. In Job 16, Job says, I've heard all of this before. What miserable comforters you are. Have you guys ever been hurting and someone comes alongside and they're a friend, right? Somebody that you trust. Maybe they even sat with you for a bit, but then they start to give you advice that's just like beating you up. And you're like, that's not even what's going on. And they're like, no, in my life, this is how it worked. You need to listen to me. I'm just trying to help you, right? You can be like Job and just quote scripture and say, what miserable comforters you are, okay? And just continue with, won't you ever stop blowing hot air? What makes you keep on talking? Right? He goes, I could say the same things if you were in my place. I could spout off criticism, shake my head at you. But if it were me, I would encourage you. I would try and take away your grief. Instead, I suffer if I defend myself, and I suffer no less if I refuse to speak. All right, I'm sure you've never done that to a friend, right? I get you guys perfect. Right? You've never gone to help somebody where they're trying to explain their story and how they felt. And you were explaining to them, it went this way because you did this probably, and this is how you should have handled it. And if you did all those things, you would feel differently, right? And if you just did this better, you wouldn't be here in this situation. So, just keep that in mind for next time. I'm sure you've never done that. I know that I have only done that every day of my life. Now, there are times, I want to be clear here that there are times if you have the right relationship with this person and at the right moment, it's okay to speak into their lives about how something should have been handled, right? We can't just go through life living our perspective of it, especially if our perspective is incorrect, right? Especially if it's issues with authority or like scripture, these things need to be clarified at some point. But it doesn't mean that we don't discount the people's feelings that they are having in it. And trust me, if they're having those feelings, they don't care about the correction at that time. But if you've addressed it, you've asked the questions, right? They're sure that that's not what happened. Maybe realize you need to adjust your process, your experience. Stop trying to put your experience into theirs and just understand them and their story and relate to them that way. God actually dealt with Job's friends because of how they treated him. We find this in Job 42, 7-9. It says, after the Lord had finished speaking to Job, he turned to Eliphaz the Temanite and said, I am angry with you and your two friends, for you have not spoken accurately about me as my servant Job has. So take 7 bulls and 7 rams and go to my servant Job and offer a burnt offering for yourselves. My servant Job will pray for you, and I will accept his prayer on your behalf. I will not treat you as you deserve, for you have not spoken accurately about me as my servant Job has. So Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar did as the Lord commanded them, and the Lord accepted Job's prayer. I don't even know, I would assume Job's prayer was like, smite him, God, for being stupid and mean. And I don't know, it doesn't really say what he prayed. I think it was good, probably more positive than that. But this matters to God, the way that we treat other people through their suffering and hardship. It angered God that they incorrectly portrayed him through their ability of trying to bring relief to Job's suffering. Now, often compassion the action that it leads to isn't talking. And empathy doesn't lead to needing to talk. But if you feel led to talk, we should first start with questions to see if we are understanding them and what's going on first, instead of assuming we feel the same thing and then responding to that. I hear you say that you're feeling hurt. Maybe you already believe maybe you're on the same page as them. You could say, one time this other situation happened to me, and I'm not trying to say it's the same experience that you're having, but afterwards it left me feeling this way. Is that similar to how you feel? I'm just trying to understand how you are feeling for the sake of understanding better. Right? We should be addressing people that way, right? And only asking for understanding, not so that you can eventually go, well, when I felt this way, this is what I did to fix it. Right? Unless they do open up and say, how would you handle this? What did you do in your situation? Right? We don't come first to fix it. We come first to understand and to sit with. Now, there's another emotion that comes into play that's similar and can be considered a near enemy of empathy, and that's sympathy. Rather than being a tool for connection, sympathy emerged in the researchers' data as actually something that caused disconnection. Because sympathy is removed. It's better than pity, because it doesn't necessarily come from a superior or inferior place type of thing, but it is someone saying, I feel sorry for you, right? That must be terrible, from a safe distance, right? Instead of going, oh, I feel sorry with you, so I'm sorry for you, right? Rather than conveying that powerful me too of empathy, it communicates, it's not happening to me, but I do feel sorry for you, right? And sympathy can trigger shame for people. Researchers found that cancer patients on the receiving side of sympathy describe it as unwanted, superficial, pity-based response that they understand is well-intended, but it seems that it's focused on the observer's discomfort rather than on alleviating the patient's distress. Right? Your "you are here" arrow may be pointed at sympathy when you're feeling sorry for someone out loud, maybe it's coming out of your mouth, they feel sorry for you, but inside you're just trying to avoid feeling the discomfort of their situation. Right? So instead of moving into compassion and empathy where you're saying, I'm willing to participate in what you're feeling, and get there with you in your suffering, you're saying, this is uncomfortable. I don't think I could go in there, and so you feel sorry for them at a distance. Sometimes that's okay. right? I want to be clear here that like maybe you have a lot going on in your own life, right? And you're like, I really don't have the capacity today to jump in there with compassion and empathy. I do feel sorry for the situation you're in, but I don't have that space to walk in there with you today, right? And that's okay. We're actually going to talk about boundaries here in a second, but it shouldn't be our first response. We should move first with compassion and empathy because that provides connection, and that's what we're really needing in life. Now, sympathy on the receiving end can make your pain feel more lonely, right? You can also feel overlooked because they're like, oh, I feel sorry for you, but it's not worth my time. And that leads to feeling invisible, which is the same as feeling not known, and therefore makes us feel like maybe we're not loved. Another thing we can fall into if we're not careful here is comparative suffering. Maybe you've experienced this, like you're hurting and things are bad and someone else goes, well, this happened to me and it was way worse than your situation. Has that ever happened to you? Just me, okay. There's a lot of heads nodding, so I'll take that, I guess. But often somebody's heart's in the right place, right? Maybe they're trying to show you like, look, I've been in a worse situation and I recovered. So there's hope for you. It's going to be okay. But that doesn't feel like we're in this together when somebody compares their suffering, right? And so instead of just saying, whoa, like, I feel how you're feeling, and that's hard, and I get it, and just, it's okay that you're there, it starts to sound like my hurt was worse than your hurt, right? And they're like one-upping your pain, and you're like, I don't want to one-up this. I want to one-down it. Okay, thanks for laughing, some of you. And you take away the credibility of their story, right? Perspective is fine, right? There are times when you're trying to pull someone out of despair or hardship, and they can't see life clearly, and they need some help seeing perspective. But you have to be careful that it's not coming across as comparative suffering. Right now, the number one question that arises when Brene Brown is teaching people on empathy is, how can I be empathetic with someone if I haven't had their experience? Now, we have to remember that empathy is not relating to an experience. It's connecting to what someone is feeling about an experience. All right, so in this room, we're going to do this. Raise your hand if you've ever felt joy. Yeah, all right. Okay, raise your hand if you've ever felt hurt before. Have you ever felt shame before? I was just waiting until Zach put his hand down. He was just keeping it up between everything. What about heartbreak? Okay, what about love? What about grief? All right, nice. I just see people aren't even paying attention, just raising their hands. They're like, maybe I'm going to get a high five. What that means is you've felt a lot of things. You've probably felt a lot more emotions than that, which means you're qualified to be empathetic with anybody. Right? Because you have a situation that has happened to you that has caused you to feel a way with them, and you're trying to connect on the understanding of the feeling, not on the experience. Right? You don't need to be an expert. You don't need to have experienced everything in the world to connect with empathy. You need to connect to maybe your own experiences in the thinking, cognitive way, right? That creates that emotional resonance. Like, right, I have been there before, and I have felt that way, and I remember what that feels like. Right? Don't fall into the, oh, now I got to feel it, and then let it drag you down to feel with them. But just remembering on the cognitive side of your brain how that felt so that you can understand and connect. Compassion and empathy are necessary for human connection. They're necessary for that vulnerability side of building friendships. So if you're vulnerable with someone and they don't meet you there with compassion and empathy, you're most likely not going to open back up to them. And therefore, you'll be missing a piece of your frientimacy triangle. And then you won't be able to get to deep friendship. So on both sides, right, you need to be vulnerable and hope that they have compassion and empathy. But then if you want to be a good friend, you need to be willing to meet people with compassion and empathy when they're vulnerable. Now, there's another piece. It's not an emotion, and we talked about it just a second ago, but it's not only needed for good, healthy friendships, but it's been found to be almost like a prerequisite for compassion and empathy, and that's having clear, healthy boundaries, right? Or at least knowing how to use them and how to communicate them. We have to be clear to where we end in this relationship, in our friendship, and where they begin. some people don't have those clear, defined boundaries in them. And so when you're feeling something, they're feeling it, and they're enmeshed in it. And you can't have compassion when you're both feeling everything together at the same time, right? And I need you to not feel what I'm feeling right now. I need you to be a separate person is a boundary. We also naturally struggle to be compassionate or have empathy towards people who have ran over our boundaries, right? If we feel that we've been hurt or people have taken advantage of us or they're walking all over us, it's really hard for us to say, I want to connect with you in your pain. It's actually like, I want to connect with you, this fist to your face. No, I take that back. Okay. So if we want to practice compassion, I've totally lost my train. Okay. Blammo. All right, if we want to practice compassion, we have to start by setting boundaries and then holding people accountable, right, when they come to push our boundaries. Boundaries are very similar to expectations. We talked about expectations a few weeks ago, and so it may be a good refresher to go back and listen to that part on why we need to communicate them and the importance of communicating unmet expectations and why we need to share them. But boundaries are expectations that are specific to like our limits, right? It's like the edge of where things are okay, and it's just setting like, this is fine, but that would not be fine. Now, we all have boundaries, whether you've communicated them or not. And usually that's the problem that you run into in friendships is you never communicated the boundary and then people run over them and you're just upset, and we got to communicate those things. Now, boundaries are kind of like the personal space bubble around your soul, around your emotions, right? Just like if somebody came up to you, you guys probably know some close talkers, right? And they come up and they're just like in your face talking. And so you like step back and then they step close and you're like, leave some room for Jesus, please. Right? And you communicate the boundary, right? We have personal space that we need around our emotions, but we don't communicate it. We often let people get way too close. And then we're uncomfortable and we're kind of hurt by it and things, and they spit on our emotions. Right? And we're like, this wasn't okay. But until we've defined it and we've communicated it, I need that space, people will get in there. We have to have these for our souls, for our feelings. So those things need to be communicated. Now, setting healthy boundaries requires self-awareness, right? You need to be clear about our expectations of ourselves and others, what we are and what we are not comfortable with in specific situations. Setting healthy boundaries requires good communication skills, right? You have to be assertive and bring clarity in those things. Assertiveness involves expressing your feelings openly and respectfully. It does not entail making demands, right? But it does require people to listen to you, right? A boundary isn't any good if they haven't heard it and understand it. Now, so I know it's been on the screen, but here are 3 easy steps, beginning steps to setting healthy boundaries. Step 1 is be clear and straightforward as possible, right? You don't have to like raise your voice and be like angry about it, but you need to be clear and straightforward. So in other words, don't give like, well, because this thing happened the other day and then you got too close to my bubble and these things happened and, and I was uncomfortable and this and that and it just made me feel weird. So anyways, like if you could just maybe not like do that again, that'd be cool. Like that's not setting a boundary. That's just rambling. Okay. But usually that's how we address it because it's uncomfortable sometimes. Even more so if you didn't establish boundaries at the beginning of a relationship and you've had a relationship for years and you realize these boundaries need to go in place, they're not going to come easy. But just be clear and straightforward with them. Right? I read recently this phrase that says, don't make a permanent decision based on temporary emotions. And so make sure that when you are deciding what your boundaries need to be, that it's coming from a healthy mindset. Right, that you're in a good place of health, that you're not setting boundaries because you're angry or because you're frustrated or because you're hurt, but that they're coming from a healthy spot. Because usually those boundaries are, they're not realistic when they come from places of hurt and frustration. And so they will either be crossed again or the relationship will end. Right? Step 2 is you need to state your need or request directly in terms of what you'd like rather than what you don't want. Right? Often we get there and we're like, I really didn't like when you did that, so don't do that again. Right? And when we only give like the no options, it feels like we're saying, like, just, you can't be a friend with me. We're not giving space for what is okay, right? And so you need to state what is okay and maybe what's not okay on both sides. It could be as simple as, right, because you can't take away people's humanness. Sometimes we want to say, right, like, because you were angry, you did these things, so we just say, you can't be angry, right? And that's unrealistic. They're a human, right? And so we can say it's okay to be mad, but it's not okay for you to raise your voice at me and break my stuff, right? Or it's okay to change your mind, but it's not okay to assume that I'm good with the changes without you talking to me, right? Or it's okay to disagree with me in our friendship, but it's not okay to ridicule my ideas and my beliefs, right? And so you have to give both space, right? If there's an action you definitely don't want them doing, to clarify what that is, but give them what is okay, right? Because we still need people to be themselves, and we can't say you can't be a human and then expect that boundary to exist. And step 3 is then to accept any discomfort that arises as a result, whether it's guilt, shame, or remorse, right? Like I said, especially if you've never set boundaries before, when you set them, you may feel guilty. Saying like, well, I know it wasn't always our friendship like this, or these things weren't always how it was. You may start to feel remorse or discomfort from it, especially if the other person acts out. Why are you putting these things in place? I thought we were friends. I thought blah, 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 right? Because people will push back on that if they didn't exist before. Now, don't go back on your boundaries. Right? After they're communicated, hold people accountable to it. Letting boundaries slide can lead to confusion and encourage different expectations and demands from people around you. Try and keep things as consistent and steady as you can. But this helps to reinforce your original boundaries you put in place. Communicate when boundaries are crossed. Right? Communication is critical to the world of boundaries, right? Especially if someone is consistently overstepping yours. You may need to raise concerns, but it doesn't need to be like confrontational, right? It's not like we need to have a meeting because you're stepping over my boundaries right now. Maybe you have somebody that you're like, hey, I need you to not like message me all day because I have work and I can't focus on those things, right? You can say, I see that you're really trying to get a hold of me. The best thing to do is send me a message and trust that I will get back to you, right? It highlights the behavior you're not okay with, the boundary that they got in the way of, and what you expect from them moving forward. And it's those type of things. You may even have to consider communicating consequences, right, if they go beyond your boundaries. Like, if this keeps happening when we talk about this subject, we will never talk about that topic again, or we will have to take a break from talking about that. That can be a really helpful one right now in the time of politics and maybe within your family. This always gets too heated, and if it's going to keep getting heated or you're going to start doing these certain actions, we just won't talk about this topic anymore. I will leave if it comes up, right? Or maybe it's, if you keep acting that way, I won't be able to help you with those tasks. Or if you keep coming across my boundaries that I've placed here, you won't be welcome in my home, right? And these are okay things to say, right? It's not something that we established from the beginning, right? But there are boundaries we need to put in place. In addition to setting your own boundaries, you need to appreciate other people's boundaries, right? Even if they're different from your own. Sometimes we don't know the boundaries, and if you're unsure, ask, right? The conversation doesn't have to be awkward or confrontational. It's like, hey, did I do anything that you'd rather I not do when it comes to our friendship, or am I, is there something that's been uncomfortable that's happened between us, or is there a boundary that I need to know when it comes to blah, 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 right? I recognize that maybe you were uncomfortable with how this situation happened yesterday. Was I approaching a boundary in our relationship? And the more that we're upfront about those things instead of shying away from them and acting like they should be, hidden things, the more healthy your relationship will be. Now, the last thing about healthy boundaries is that some of us don't have healthy boundaries. We have built fortified armed walls around our lives, right? It's like more of a military base. And anybody who comes to be a friend, we're like invasion, and we just take them out. Right? We don't let anyone into our lives, and we view most interactions as these invasions into wanting to take us down from the inside. That's not healthy boundaries, okay? I know people are like, I have healthy boundaries. They're like, no, you have walls, and those are not healthy. See, you guys are used to walls here, right? You know, people's houses, like my house, doesn't have, it has walls around it, not fences. You know, in the Midwest, a lot of our yards don't even have anything around it. They just flow together, and that's also an unhealthy boundary, okay? But we have chain link fences, and they're not tall ones in most places. They're usually like, you know, I don't know, 3 foot, 4 feet high. And I think chain link fences are a more appropriate level of boundaries, right? They're open so that others can see you, but they still provide a boundary of like, this is as close as you can come without being invited in, right? But people are welcome to come over and lean on it and talk to you, you know? And if they drop something on the other side, it's not like a huge invasion of privacy for them to reach over and grab it. But yet, you know, there's still a gate that they could come through if they're brought that way. And so I think chain link fence more than walls when it comes to boundaries. Right now, I think you guys all just got a text that went out because I was supposed to be done by now. But there are some worksheets that I found online that are really simple walkthroughs of how to establish boundaries. And so I put together a Google Drive folder that has them there. And so if you want them, you can respond to that text or our church text number. You can send the word boundaries, and you'll get that link. Just, you know, figured it'd be more help than what I'm saying today. But I want to end with this last story of friendship from the Bible, and it should only take another half an hour. But some people consider this the best friends of the Bible, and that is David and Jonathan in the Old Testament. And so we're going to look briefly at their friendship, because I just want to point out 2 brief things that will help you build better, healthier, stronger relationships. And Jonathan and David had a really unlikely friendship. We talked about David not too long ago and his conflict with King Saul when we were talking about jealousy and grief. David was the lowly shepherd boy who was anointed the future king of Israel, who also killed the giant Goliath, right? And surprisingly enough, he befriends Jonathan, who happens to be King Saul's son, right? Presumably the next king of Israel. Right? Jealousy or hatred could easily have marked their relationship. But instead, we watch Jonathan's devotion to God and to David outdo his desire for position or power. I mean, his dad literally wanted to kill David, and he's like, you know what, David's going to be my best friend. Jonathan maybe wasn't the best at making decisions, but he was a great friend, okay? Scripture shows us that Jonathan was a unique kind of friend, and so in 1 Samuel 18:3 and 4, it says, then Jonathan made a covenant with David because he loved him as his own soul. And Jonathan stripped himself of the robe that was on him, his royal robe, and he gave it to David. None of these scriptures are on the thing. They're real short. If you back, they're lost, Jackson. 1 Samuel 19:1 says, but Jonathan, Saul's son, delighted much in David. In another verse it says, then Jonathan said to David, whatever you say, I will do for you. Another place it says, and Jonathan, Saul's son, rose and went to David at Horesh and strengthened his hand in God. Sometimes we need to take responsibility in our friendship, right? I run into many people who are longing for good friends, right? Like we said, the loneliness is an epidemic in our world, and so we encounter a lot of people who want good friends. And majority of the time when I talk to them about their friends and their friendship, I find that they're not really making an effort to make friends, right? So I want you to consider, are you the person who's consistently being positive when you interact with people? Are you building others up? Are you an encourager? Are you willing to open up and be vulnerable? Are you making efforts to have that consistent connection with someone? Or are you just waiting around for it to magically happen? If it's not working with the people you're trying to make it work with, then maybe try someone else, right? Maybe it is, the king's that trying to kill you. It's his son. I don't know. But David and Jonathan became these great friends during a time period where David was literally running from his life from Jonathan's dad, right? It's not like they were best friends because they worked together. It's not that their lives kept interacting together. David was literally like hiding in caves and out doing battles and stuff. And Jonathan was at some battles and here and there, but they kept their friendship up because of all those things we just read that Jonathan kept going to David. Jonathan kept choosing to love David. Jonathan kept saying, David, you're my friend, and I want to come strengthen you. Right? And Jonathan kept making those records. And when we look at all of those accounts, David was not the one often running to Jonathan to keep the friendship up. And part of that was because he was running for his life. But Jonathan made more efforts in their friendship. He championed, he served, and he was loyal to David, even at a great cost. Right? He gave up being the future king. Many of us want others to pursue us for friendship, right? We want invitations to events or parties or things that are going on. And it is true that we all feel loved when people go out of their way to include us. But when we look at the example of Jonathan, we see a friendship marked by service and pursuit of others, not of himself. You might need to change your view of friendship from, why aren't others befriending me, to how can I befriend someone else? Sometimes you may just need to speak up with your friends. Like maybe this has happened to you, where you've been hanging out with someone and you've had a lot going on, and you really needed to feel seen and heard and known, but there wasn't an opportunity. You kept waiting for someone to say, "Hey, how's your week been?" Or "Hey, you looked a little down. What's going on?" But nobody did, and you went home and go, "Man, I have bad friends. Right? They don't really care about me." It's probably not true, right? But often we walk away from those because nobody approached me. But I bet if you said, "Hey, can I share something? I've just been having a hard week." I bet they'll stop whatever they're doing to sit alongside you. That's my alarm to be done. I'm sorry. All right, yeah. Boundaries. But man, we're all humans, and I can't read minds. I don't know if you can read minds. And as wonderful it would have been for people to ask if you had something going on, just say something. Speak up. Be vulnerable first. Realistically, they probably also all have something going on and want to be felt, heard, and seen and known all the same. So just step up and do that. And secondly, Jonathan offered unwavering support, right? Just throughout all of the challenges and complicated circumstances. In 1 Samuel 23, 15 through 17, it says, "One day near Horesh, David received the news that Saul was on his way to Ziph to search for him and kill him. Jonathan went to find David and encouraged him to stay strong in his faith in God. 'Don't be afraid,' Jonathan reassured him. 'My father will never find you. You are going to be the king of Israel, and I will be next to you, as my father Saul is well aware.'" Jonathan reminds David of what's true. He shares his unwavering faith in God's plan and his faithfulness when David was feeling down and struggling and not having faith in it himself. Instead of looking at what we need from others, look for ways that you could serve and spiritually strengthen those that God has put in your path. Right? The author of Hebrews says in Hebrews 3:13, "But encourage one another daily as long as it is called today." Right? Is today? When you get to tomorrow, will it be today? Yeah, that was confusing. What about 2 days? No, I'm just kidding. But it's always today. And so always look for opportunities to encourage one another daily. Right? This is the goal for Christian friendships, right? If I made the Frientimacy triangle, not only would it have a cooler name, but it would have God at the top point of it, right? Because every piece of that should be pointing each other and encouraging one another to God, right? I'm consistent in my friends' lives because I know that I need someone consistent in my life to help me grow like Christ, to help encourage me towards God. And so I need to be that in other people's lives. I'm open and vulnerable about my life and the things I'm going through because I know other people are going through similar situations, and they need to see that how I found God and what I went through and what God is doing in my life, in the good and the bad. Right? And so we need those types of relationships that are drawing us all towards God. Fulfilling friendships are built on positivity, consistency, and vulnerability. And as we strive to embody these qualities, let's remember that our ultimate goal is to glorify God through our relationships. Right? So go and be the friend that uplifts, who remains steadfast, who opens their heart to empathy and compassion, and help point others towards God's love. All right, let's pray. God, we thank you so much for your example of love, of compassion and empathy that you have for us, God. That you desire to know us in and out, and that even though you know us completely through the goods and the bads, that you still desire to love us with everything you have, God. Thank you that we are known by you, God, more than we know you. God, I pray that you would help us to be friends, to build deep, satisfying friendships in our lives based on the emotions that you've given us of compassion and empathy, that those things would draw us to connect on deeper, more meaningful levels so that we can be shaped more into your likeness, God. Remind us to be an encouraging group of people to those that we encounter in our lives, to consistently reach out to people and to be willing to be open. God, that as we set healthy boundaries in place, God, that we don't build up walls that people cannot have access to who we are. But God, that we let people see us so that we can feel known the way that you created us to feel known. In Jesus' name we pray, amen. All right, go and make deep friendships today.